Good evening, Devarshi.
Thank you, Aditya and it's a joy to be here with my friends in Pune.
Yes, and Devarshi ji is now coming from Chandigarh, and I think all over here know, but because the Sangha continues to grow, Devarshi ji is the head of the men's monastery, which is based out of Chandigarh and oversees the Kriya Sangha in India. I'd like to welcome you once again.
I'm going to be talking tonight about how to live life guided by intuition, energy, and inspiration. And this is something that really is important for all devotees. And I'll read this passage from the Gita, chapter 4, stanza 9. Krishna says, "One, O Arjuna, who by intuition comprehends the truth of my divine manifestations and selfless deeds in this vibratory universe, will never again, after he leaves his body, need to incarnate in outward form. Soaring in freedom, he will attain me." And again, "O Arjuna, who by intuition comprehends the truth of my divine manifestations, will never again have to incarnate again. He will attain me." So this idea of intuition, we usually think of intuition as something that only creative people use, or people who are leading a spiritual work and having to tune into God's will as to what to do next and make decisions. And yes, intuition can be used that way. But intuition is how we comprehend the truth. It's how we know God. And for every devotee, this understanding of intuition, how to develop it, how to awaken it, how to live by it, is essential to everything, because it's how we are going to find God. Yogananda even said that knowing God, we know God through our intuition. And I'll get more into what he meant, what intuition really is. But when we start awakening intuition, we start awakening divine perception, as Krishna is saying in this Gita passage here. When I first came to Ananda village in 1977, what really captured me immediately was that these were people, as soon as I started meeting the residents there, these were people who were inspired, uplifted, energetic, and I couldn't put my finger on, it wasn't like it was in a book, or I couldn't describe it to, call home to my family and tell them what this organization or this company was like. I just knew that I was inspired there. And I knew that I wanted to live a life of inspiration, of this joy, working with this clear, devotional feeling energy. Now, I think everyone who's been with Ananda for a long time or on the spiritual path understands that it's not like the whole spiritual path is one unending spree of intuition and inspiration. We're tested, we're challenged, we have our ups and downs. But you'll see that those who succeed to the very end, until the very end of their final freedom, that thread of intuition, that living by intuitive awareness, perception, inspiration, all these things, energy, they're all tied together. And those who really stay with an inspired, successful spiritual life have that thread that's woven through their entire life. Yeah, and sometimes that thread gets buried by tests and challenges and doubt and all these things. But by consciously working with these things, we can make great spiritual progress. Now, Swamiji talked a lot about Kriya Yoga. I'm working on a book on Kriya Yoga right now, and it's getting close to being completed. It should be out next year, early next year sometime. And Swamiji again and again talks about not only the spiritual life, but even Kriya Yoga in particular, as both science and art. And the art part, he said, I can teach you the techniques of Kriya, I can teach you the science of it, how it works. But he said, what's really, really important about Kriya, what's most important, he said, I cannot teach you that. That is understanding the art, which comes from an intuitive way of working with devotion, with the energy in our spines, with this understanding of how we know God, especially. Even scientists, great scientists, understand this. Albert Einstein, who came up with that theory of relativity and much more, he said intuition is the father of new knowledge. And it's not like we're trying to become Einsteins and scientists, maybe spiritual Einsteins. We're trying to develop new knowledge, which is true understanding and comprehension of God. And intuition is how we get there. Now, Einstein added something interesting. He said, knowledge is necessary too. An intuitive child could not accomplish anything without some knowledge. There will come a point in everyone's life, however, where only intuition can make the leap ahead without ever knowing precisely how. One can never know why, but one must accept intuition as fact. And Einstein himself was saying that his theory of relativity came in a moment of inspiration and intuition and intuitive perception of the truth. It didn't come from reason. Reason guided him to that point, and it sort of was a foundation, just like the path of Kriya Yoga and the science and the techniques give us a foundation. But in the end, again, Swamiji at Kriya initiations frequently, he said, I cannot teach you the most important part of this, which is the art of it. And Swamiji, I'll just say something that he wrote about this. Science is the lesser part of understanding. Art, that is to say, the subtle inspiration with which one applies the science, is the true essence, both of understanding and of creativity. Art can never be taught nor learned. The techniques of painting can be studied, but the subtle heart of painting must be discovered by the artist for himself. It can be neither described nor defined. If ever this art, so essential to high achievement in any field, can be acquired from anyone, it must come by a process of what may be called spiritual osmosis, which is through the Guru. It's also through others who are inspired and uplifted and being around them. And we see this. When our inspiration is lacking, our devotion is lacking, all we have to do is just go get close, nudge up close to a friend who has inspiration and this deep devotion. And that osmosis and that magnetism starts to reawaken our own natural inspiration and intuition that was never completely gone, but it just started, the flame started going out. Now, Yogananda defined intuition as calm feeling of the heart. And he said this is how we perceive God, is from the heart. In his poem, Samadhi, Yogananda, he wrote about that experience of cosmic consciousness. And he said about it, he said, I cognized the center of the Empyrean as a point of intuitive perception in my heart. And he understood truth from this point of intuitive perception in his heart. He also wrote in that poem, Samadhi, that the storm of Maya stilled by magic wand of intuition deep. And so intuition is integral, is essential for everyone who wants to know God has to understand what intuition is, how to develop it. And again, it can't be taught. It's not like, there's 5 rules for intuition and you just follow these steps and you'll have it. It needs to be developed in deep stillness, in meditation, in attunement to the great ones, to the gurus, to the masters. Master, again, he defined intuition as calm feeling. And he described emotional feeling as agitated feeling. And so this is the key. It's how we get from agitated emotional feeling to deep, still, calm feeling. And so we start with emotional feeling. We go into our meditation. We've had a rough day. We have a lot of worries. We have problems in our lives. We're upset about something. Those agitated feelings of the heart are there. And this is what, Patanjali, he said, yogas chitta vritti nirod. Yoga is the neutralizing of those waves of emotional feeling, these chitta vrittis that Swamiji wrote about them in that way. And so we practice Hongsa technique as a way of calming the heart and calming the agitated feeling of the heart. Even just simple breathing, watching the breath, doing this simple mantra, it starts to slow down the breath. When the breath gets slower, the heartbeat gets slower. When the heartbeat gets slower, the waves of emotion get slower. And the mind's restlessness also starts to slow down. And then as we start to calm those feelings of the heart, and we're not deadening those feelings, otherwise we could just take a few shots of whiskey and calm those feelings and go into deep meditation. We're just calming those waves of feeling, but we're trying to actually awaken divine feeling. And this divine feeling is devotion. And devotion is when this feeling is awakened with energy and it's uplifted and offered upwards to the spiritual life from the heart. And this is really simply is the difference between emotion and devotion. Emotion is the restless, agitated feeling that's usually being directed outwardly towards desire, attachment, anger, fear, all these things. And devotion is this calm feeling offered upward with aspiration, with devotional giving, with yearning, offered up to the spiritual eye, to God, to the Guru, to the Divine Mother, in meditation, even during the technique of Kriya Yoga. So this is how we work with the feeling of the heart and how we start developing calm, intuitive perception. And what happens is that we start to understand truth more from an intuitive level in a way that we can't really always explain it so rationally. In the last couple of years, I've had more of a vivid sort of experience of this than usual because I was given the task of developing a monastery for Ananda, India. And a monastery, the way Swamiji talked about a monastery, it's a community of monks. That's the definition of a monastery. It's not just solo monks, doing their work like some of our monks do. So that's also a different way of being a monk. But a monastery is a community of monks, serving together, living together, meditating together every day, doing all these things. And how to develop that was just a real puzzle because it was difficult to do in the way that we tried and failed over the years. Even in Ananda Village, it was a real challenge. And just somehow over time, the intuition came to shift away from the city center there in Pune. And it was a little hard on me and everyone to yank the monks away from all of you in Pune. But it was necessary. And I think someone there in Pune, one of your longtime members, about a year after we shifted first to Kandala and now we're in Chandigarh, one of the longtime members, after about a year, he saw the monks at an event. He said, now I know. Now I see why you did this. He said, I was really upset when you did it at first, and I was hurt, and just why did you guys have to leave? That's real stupid that you had to leave and all this. And I understood the feelings of the heart. There was nice personal fondness that we all had for each other. But then he said, now I see. You have this bond and this sort of community energy and this inspiration that you needed to take this step in order to do. And it was to a high degree, it was an intuitive step because it was really thinking outside the box. And I did check with, Nayaswami, our spiritual directors, Jyotishji, Deviji, Dhyanaji, Jayaji, just because, there can be false intuition. Intuition can deceive us and it can be clouded. And so I did check every step of the way. But it turned out, yes, it was a true inspiration. And really to do anything new in our lives, to make really, drastic changes, and I don't mean drastic in terms of like violent changes, but really a revelation that changes how we work, how we live, how we relate. It takes a high degree of intuition. Swami Kriyanandaji, he built Ananda. The idea of creating Ananda, it was a crazy idea. No one really thought he could pull it off, and it was such a new idea. I think people were saying, why can't you just do something sort of normal that everyone else is doing? But in order to do anything really great and really different, it does take an intuitive inspiration. Now, that's the trick. It has to be in tune with God, and it has to be truly inspired, not just a delusion. But the way we work with that step by step over time is by learning how to work with the feelings of the heart, by calming them, by working with devotion, by working with self-offering, by learning how to perceive from this center of the calm feeling of the heart. It's almost like there's a brain there that perceives, that's far more perceptive in a deeper way than the brain cells in the head. And really, in many ways, the center of our awareness is here in the heart. More, and this is what Yogananda said, this point of intuitive perception. And we all know this intuitively and naturally, because whenever we point to ourselves and say, oh, I did that, or that's mine, where do we point? We don't point to our head and say, oh, that's mine, or our elbow or our knee. We point here at our heart. Oh, that's mine, or I did that. And we just touch it there because we know that's our spiritual center in a way, and our center of really true inspired awareness. And again, as Krishna says in the Gita, it's really how we know God. And so Kriya Yoga is a science. It is a technique, but this is why Swamiji says about Kriya. He says, if it is such an exalted science, why has it not been published in book form so that everyone might learn it? And he answers his own question, a reasonable question, certainly. The masters themselves, however, have decreed it should not be published, precisely because it is a teaching that transcends reason itself. Right understanding of it depends on the unfolding of intuition. And so try to be aware of this. Now, energy is the other key to this, because in order to direct that feeling of the heart up to the spiritual eye, we have to have control of that life force, that's pranayam, that comes through a practice like Kriya. But we also have to have energy. And low energy, the energy gets pulled downward. High energy, it can either go into restlessness and even more agitated feeling and emotion, or if we take that strong, powerful energy and in a very calm, focused way, directed upwards to the spiritual eye, that's how we develop this intuition. Finally, Yoganandaji said that the best way to develop intuition and where and how we develop it is during the time in meditation after we finish all the techniques, after we finish the Kriya technique for those who have Kriya Yoga, and then we're sitting in that stillness and silence for at least 15 minutes after that. And it's not a blank time, it's not subconscious where we're just kind of waiting for something to happen. We are consciously offering this awakened feeling of the heart upwards, but it's a time of just listening, receptivity, of really trying to tune in to God, tuning in to divine joy or divine love or some aspect of God. And it's during that time of deep inner stillness that intuition is developed. So very consciously try during that time after finishing Kriya and the other techniques, really be aware that this is the time when I'm working with the feeling energy, the calm feeling of the heart, which is intuition. And this is how I know God. And partly how we do that, because it can't be taught, but in a way it can. It can be taught by the Guru. It can be taught by the Divine Mother. And the way we do that is simply when we're sitting in that stillness, ask them, help me, Guruji, guide my consciousness, help me to tune into your magnetism and change my own magnetism so that I start to perceive from the heart, from this calm feeling perception center here, rather than just with my intellect. And this, in the end, is how, again, it's how we know God. Arjuna, disciple of Krishna, he was being guided by Krishna. Develop intuition, for this is how you perceive the Lord. This is how, at that moment of passing, how you don't come back and incarnate again and again, is simply by having that intuitive awareness of God, that intuitive knowledge of the divine. And that comes through daily meditation, through seva, through devotion, through inspiration, through all these beautiful teachings. And that's why in the end, Kriya Yoga, everything that we do is a practice. We have to just keep practicing it, and you'll find that this intuitive awareness of how we know God starts very naturally to develop over time. So work on these things. It can take time, it can take practice, but I have seen with the divine inevitability that those who practice these things the way our gurus taught them, the way that we've been guided to, in all the ways that I've been talking about this evening, it starts to develop over time through our efforts and through their grace. So may their grace especially be added to our efforts and bring us home to this place of really complete intuitive knowing that we are one with God. So many blessings, and let's